I still don't talk about that night much. People ask, they always ask. They hear you were a SEAL and they want the story, the loud one, the one with the music in their head already playing. And I give them something, a clean version, the kind that fits at a dinner table. But the real one I keep folded up small in the back somewhere, because the real one isn't about us. It's about a man whose name I almost never learned, an old man who shouldn't have been able to lift a rifle, let alone aim one. He saved 7 of us with a gun older than my father. And nobody believes me when I say it, so mostly I don't say it. Tonight I will. Let me set it up so it makes sense, the way it didn't make sense to us when it was happening. It was late autumn, high up in a valley that doesn't show up cleanly on any map you'd own. Locals called it Sarkesh. We just called it the Bowl, because that's what it was, a long stone basin with mountains standing around it like men who'd come to watch a fight and decided not to break it up. There were 8 of us when we went in. I want you to remember that number, 8. We were not supposed to be in a firefight. I need you to understand that part. This was a recovery. A small surveillance bird had gone down 2 nights before, engine, not enemy, just bad luck and thin air, and the 2-man crew had walked away from the wreck and gone quiet. They had a beacon. The beacon was pinging from a village called Daru, halfway up the eastern wall of the bowl. 40, maybe 50 houses, flat roofs, stone and mud. The kind of place that's been there 1,000 years, and will be there 1,000 more, long after everybody arguing over it is dust. We went in at night. We always went in at night. The mountains at night up there are a strange thing, colder than you'd think, and so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat trying to give you away. Chief Reyes ran the team. I won't pretend to tell you everything about Reyes, because half of what I knew about him turned out to be wrong, and the other half he told me himself later when there was a reason to. For now just know this, Reyes was the calmest human being I have ever stood next to. Bullets could be coming apart in the air around him, and his voice would drop, not rise, lower, slower, like he was talking you off a ledge. The rest of us, Tuck, who never shut up except when it counted, Bishop, who barely talked at all, Doc Avila, our corpsman, who carried a photo of his daughter taped inside his helmet, Pike and Lang, the 2 best shooters I ever served with, and me. They called me Carolina on account of where I'm from and the fact that I said y'all exactly 1 time during selection, and it stuck for the rest of my career. I was the new guy, the FNG, 23 years old and convinced I'd seen everything. I had seen nothing. We came up the dry creek bed below Daru just after 2 in the morning. It went wrong slow, then all at once. That's the part movies always lie about. They make it sudden. It's not. There's usually this long stretch where some animal part of your brain is screaming and the rest of you is still saying, nah, it's fine, look how quiet it is. It was too quiet. A village like that, even at 2 a.m., has sounds. A dog, a door, somebody's cough, an animal shifting in a pen. Daru had nothing. Daru was holding its breath. Bishop felt it first. He just stopped, put a fist up. We all sank down into the rocks like water finding its level. No smoke, he whispered. That was it, 2 words. And he was right. Cold night, mountain village, and not one chimney breathing. Not one. Which meant the people weren't asleep in their houses keeping warm. Which meant the people had left, or been made to leave. Reyes keyed his radio soft, asked Higher for anything new. Higher had nothing. Just the beacon, still pinging steady from a house near the top of the village. We should have turned around. I've thought about that more times than I can count. We had 2 men down somewhere up in that dead village and a beacon that was either them or bait, and every instinct we had was screaming bait, and we went anyway. Because that's the job. You don't leave people. You especially don't leave people because going to get them feels dangerous. If it didn't feel dangerous, they wouldn't have sent us. So we went up. We made it almost to the house. The beacon was in a place near the top, a 2-story stone building bigger than the rest, the kind a village headman might live in. We had eyes on the door. Pike was already moving to set up an angle on the roofline. Doc was right behind me, close enough that I could hear him breathing through his nose, slow, the way he did when he was keeping himself level. And then the whole hillside lit up. I don't know a better way to say it. One second it was black and the next there were muzzle flashes blooming all the way around the upper edge of that bowl, above us, beside us, behind the line we just walked through. Not a few guns. Not a dozen. It sounded like the mountain itself had decided to open up. They'd let us in. That's the thing that still makes my stomach drop. They watched us come up that creek bed in the dark, every step, and they let us walk all the way up into the throat of it, and then they closed the door behind us. We weren't ambushed, we were swallowed. Tuck went down in the first 3 seconds, took one through the thigh and dropped behind a low wall, cursing in 2 languages, already crawling, already firing. Lang was hit too, shoulder, kept shooting one-handed. The rest of us went flat into whatever stone we could find and started trying to figure out a thing that I will tell you straight up did not have an answer. How do you get out of the middle of a place when the enemy is the whole edge of it? Ray's voice came over the net, lower, slower. Find me cover and a casualty point. We are not dying in the open. We got into the big stone house. I don't fully remember how. There's a gap there. I've talked to Doc about it since, and he doesn't remember crossing that courtyard either, and we did it together, hauling Tuck between us while Pike and Lang put rounds up the slope to keep heads down. Inside it was black and it smelled like cold ash and old grain. Empty. The 2 downed airmen weren't there. Of course they weren't. The beacon was sitting on a windowsill, alone, doing exactly what it had been left to do, which was call us into the deepest part of the trap. So now it was 7.5 of us, Tuck barely able to stand, inside one stone house, in a dead village, with the entire ring of the bowl above us full of men who had all the time in the world. Doc went to work on Tuck and Lang in the dark, by feel, talking the whole time, low and steady. You're fine, it went through. Look at me, you're fine. Ray's was at the window calling for support. The answer came back and it was the worst answer there is. Weather had socked in the high passes. Air support was an hour out, maybe more. An hour in that bowl with what was coming up that slope, an hour was 100 years. I remember looking at Bishop, who never showed anything, and Bishop looked back at me and gave me this little nod, and I understood the nod. The nod meant, this might be it, kid, and that's okay, you did fine. I was 23. I did not think it was okay. They came in waves after that, probing first, then harder. We held the doorway and the 2 front windows and we made them pay for every meter, and it didn't matter, because there were so many of them and so few of us, and every magazine I burned was one I was never getting back. I started doing the math no soldier should ever do, counting rounds, counting bodies, counting minutes, and all 3 numbers were going the wrong way. Doc got Tuck's leg tied off. Lang was pale and quiet, which scared me more than if he'd been screaming. Pike took a graze across the scalp and just wiped the blood out of his eye and kept shooting like it was an inconvenience. And Ray's moved between us in the dark, a hand on a shoulder here, a word there, redistributing ammo, calm, calm, calm. At one point he crouched next to me while I was changing a mag with hands that would not stop shaking, and he said, real quiet, just for me, breathe out before you press, same as the range. The range, like we were at the range. I breathed out, I pressed, I got steadier. I have thought about that one sentence for 15 years. Then, somewhere past the worst of it, when I had genuinely started to make my peace, and I want to be honest, I had. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop expecting to live, almost like relief. That's when it happened. A shot came from the wrong direction. Just one, sharp, older sounding than ours, deeper, a heavier crack with a kind of cough at the end of it, and it didn't come from the slope where the enemy was. It came from above and behind them. From higher up the eastern wall, where there was nothing but a few broken terraces and an old goat trail, and as far as any of us knew, no one at all. We all heard it. Even in that noise, we heard it because it was wrong. Bishop said, "Who is that?" Nobody had an answer. Then it came again, and again, slow, spaced out. One careful shot at a time, not panic fire, not a soldier with a full magazine and a job, something patient, something that picked. And up on the slope, the men who had us surrounded started, for the first time all night, to die. Here's a thing about a firefight that nobody tells you. You don't actually see most of it. You see your little slice. Your window, your doorway, your patch of dark. The rest of it you hear, and you piece together later from the other guys, and even then everyone's slice is different, so the truth ends up being this stitched-together thing made of 7 different nights. So when I tell you what happened next, understand I'm telling you what I saw from my window, plus what Pike saw from his, plus what Ray's admitted to a long time after, when there was no reason left to hold it back. That's how I know about the old man. The shots kept coming, slow, spaced. At first we thought it had to be one of ours. Some attachment we didn't know about, a sniper team that had been seated somewhere on Overwatch and never made the brief. It happens. The big machine doesn't always tell the small parts what the other small parts are doing. Ray's got on the net. Any friendlies on the eastern high ground? Anyone? We've got accurate fire coming off the top of the bowl, east wall, above the enemy positions. Higher came back confused. No, nothing up there. No friendlies anywhere near us. We were it. Then who the hell is shooting? Tuck said from the floor, where he was lying with his leg up on a feed sack and his rifle across his chest. Even shot through the leg, Tuck couldn't not talk. Nobody answered him, because nobody knew. But the effect we could see plain as day. Up on the slope, the enemy fire was breaking up. Not stopping, breaking up, going ragged. Men who'd been firing down on us steady and confident were suddenly looking the other way. You could see it in the muzzle flashes. They started swinging around, pointing up the hill, away from us, at whatever was up there, picking them apart one at a time. And it was one at a time. That was the eerie part. Whoever was up there was not spraying. There'd be a long pause, then one shot. Then a second or two later you'd see a flash up on the enemy line, just stop, wink out, like somebody had reached over and turned off a light. Pike, watching through his optic, said it quietly, almost to himself. "He's not missing." I have to tell you about the rifle now. The sound of it. Because that sound is the thread that the whole night hangs from, and I didn't understand it until much later. It was an old bolt action. I know that now. Back then I just knew it was different, deeper, slower, with that little working pause between shots that a bolt gun has and a modern rifle doesn't. You hear it and your brain goes, that's a grandfather's gun. That's a gun off a wall. That's a gun from a war 2 wars ago. And whoever was working that bolt was working it like he'd done it 10,000 times. No rush. Crack, pause, the soft mechanical music of a bolt cycling, pause, crack, picking them off the way you'd pick ripe fruit. The patience of it was almost worse than the speed would have been. It meant the man up there was not afraid. And a man who is not afraid in a place like that at a time like that is either out of his mind or knows exactly what he's doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. The pressure on us eased. I felt it before I understood it. The fire coming at our windows thinned out and then thinned more, because the men on the slope had a new problem, a problem above them, a problem they couldn't see and couldn't locate and couldn't stop, and it was killing them in the dark with the calm of a clock ticking. Ray saw the opening. Of course he did. That was his gift. He could feel a door start to open before it was open, and he was already moving toward it. "Doc, can they move?" Doc looked at Tuck and Lang. "Tuck, if somebody carries the weight." Lang, "Yeah, he can walk, he just can't shoot." Lang made a noise that might have been an objection. Doc ignored him. Doc was very good at ignoring objections. "Then we don't sit in this box and wait to be overrun," Ray said. "Whoever that is up there just bought us a window. We use it. We break west, down the back of the village into the creek line, and we get out of this bowl before they sort themselves out. He looked around at us in the dark. Anybody got a better idea? Now's the time. Nobody did. Carolina, that was me, you and Bishop on point, Pike laying behind, me and Doc carry tuck, Bishop's eyes, your trigger, go. We went out the back. The back of that house gave onto a little walled yard, then a gap between two other houses, then a drop down toward the Western Creek line and past it, the lip of the bowl and the mountains beyond. If we made the creek, we had cover. If we made cover, we had a chance. Maybe 40 meters of open between us and it. 40 meters of open, with God knew how many guns still up on that slope. But here's what that strange shooting up the hill had done for us. It had pulled their attention. Every man up there who had a working brain was now worried about the death coming from above and behind them, not about us slipping out the back. We weren't the threat anymore. The ghost up the hill was the threat. We crossed the first stretch clean. Bishop and me low and fast, the others behind, Rays and Doc lugging Tuck between them, Tuck biting down on his own pain so he wouldn't make noise. We were halfway when it almost ended anyway. A group of them, 4, 5, I never got a clean count, had peeled off the main line and come down low, looking to cut around the western side, maybe to flank the ghost, maybe just to find a better angle. And they came around the corner of a house and damn near walked right into us. For one full second, everybody just stood there. Both sides, that frozen heartbeat where the universe decides. Bishop didn't freeze. Bishop never froze. Bishop, who barely talked, did all his talking right then, fast and final, and 2 of them went down before they'd processed we were even there. I got another. Pike, behind me, took the last 2. It was over in maybe 3 seconds, and it was the kind of 3 seconds that takes a piece out of you that you don't get back. But the noise of it, the noise gave us away. The slope above heard, and some of them remembered they had us, and started swinging fire back down toward the western edge, toward us, hunting. We were caught in the open, Tuck on a half carry, laying slow and one-armed, 20 meters short of the creek. And that's when the old rifle spoke up for us. I didn't see him do it. I want to be clear about that. I was face down behind a pile of stones with rounds cracking off the rock above my head, and I was not in a position to be admiring the scenery. But Pike saw. Pike had a clear line up the eastern wall, and Pike was the one who put it together. And Pike told it the same way every single time for the rest of his life, never once changed a detail. And Pike was not a man who decorated his stories. He said the shots from up the hill changed. Up until then, the ghost had been shooting at the men on the slope, the main body, the ones above us. But the second those flankers swung their fire onto us in the open, the ghost retasked. Just like that. Started dropping the ones shooting at us. Like he was watching the whole board. Like he could see exactly which guns had us pinned, and he went down the line and shut them off. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3. He was covering us. Whoever he was, up there in the broken terraces with a gun off a wall, he had figured out who we were and which way we were trying to go, and he had decided, for reasons none of us could imagine yet, to spend his shots keeping us alive. A stranger, in the dark, above an enemy that outnumbered everyone, including him, including us. And he chose us. We made the creek line. I don't know how to describe rolling down into that dry creek bed, except to say it felt like going underwater. The sound changed. The fire was passing over us now instead of into us. We had a lip of earth and stone between us and the slope, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could lift my head without it being an act of faith. Doc got Tuck and laying down behind the bank and was on them again immediately, checking, rechecking, talking. Rays counted us, got to 7. Counted again the way you do, like maybe you miscounted, like maybe if you count right one more time the number gets bigger. 7 plus him. 8, all 8. Hit some of us bleeding. All of us but 8. 8 had walked into that bowl. 8 were going to try to walk out. And not one of us could have told you why. Rays lay back against the creek bank for a second, just a second, and let out a breath I'd never heard him let out before. Then he looked up the eastern wall, toward where the old rifle was still going, slow and patient and merciless, holding the whole slope's attention so we could breathe. "I want to know who that is," Ray said, quiet. "Before this is over, I want to know who that is." He got his wish, but not the way he wanted. There's a moment in every bad night where you get a choice you didn't ask for. You think the choice is going to be loud, dramatic, a door kicked in, a hand reaching out. It almost never is. Usually it's small and quiet, and it comes when you're exhausted and bleeding and all you want in the entire world is to keep moving away from the thing that's trying to kill you. Ours came in the creek bed. We were down, we were covered. The smart play, the trained play, the play any of us could have recited in our sleep was to keep going. Down the creek line, out the western lip of the bowl, into the dead ground beyond, and put distance between us and Sarkesh until the weather lifted and the birds could come get us. You do not turn back into an ambush. You do not. That's not bravery, that's how you turn 7 survivors into 8 bodies. And we all knew it. And up the hill, that old rifle was still going. Ray's was the one who said it out loud, because of course he was. "He's still up there." Nobody answered. We all knew he was still up there. We could hear him. Crack, pause, crack, slower now, the pauses longer, and it didn't take a genius to do the arithmetic. A man working a bolt gun alone, picking off an enemy that big, he wasn't winning. He couldn't win. He was buying time. He'd been buying us time this whole stretch, shot by shot, and the longer pauses meant one of two things. Either he was running low, or he was getting tired in the way that gets men killed. A lone shooter, out of ammunition or out of energy. Surrounded the same as we'd been, except he had no team, no dock, no creek bed to roll into. He had a wall and a rifle and a decision he'd made about strangers. Tuck, flat on his back, leg ruined, said what half of us were thinking and the other half were trying not to. "We don't even know who he is." "No," Ray said. "Could be anybody. Could be the guy whose village this is and he's just shooting whoever's shooting. Doesn't mean he's ours." "No," Ray said again, "doesn't." "He covered us," Pike said, quietly. "From the bank, I still up his optic, watching the slope. Twice now. When those flankers had Carolina pinned, he peeled them off us. He's not just shooting whoever. He's been watching us the whole time. He picked us." That sat there in the dark for a second. "Then he made a choice," Ray said, "and so do we. I want to be honest with you about something, because if I clean it up, the whole story turns into a lie. I did not want to go back. I was 23 and I had just spent the longest hour of my life inside a stone box waiting to die, and I had made my peace with dying, and then I'd unmade it, and now I was alive in a ditch, and every cell in my body wanted to keep crawling west toward the part of the world where people weren't trying to kill me. Going back up that hill for a man I'd never met, whose face I'd never seen, whose name I didn't know, whose side I couldn't even be certain of, every survival instinct I had screamed against it. And I think that's the thing people don't understand about courage. They think it's the absence of that voice. It isn't. The voice is always there. Courage is what you do while the voice is screaming. Rays looked around at us. 7 faces in the dark, 3 of us bleeding bad, all of us cooked. "I'm not ordering anybody," he said. "I can't carry Tuck, hold the casualties, and go up that hill. So this is a volunteer thing or it's nothing. Somebody stays here with the wounded and runs the radio and gets them out if it goes bad. And whoever's left comes with me, and we go pull that man off that wall before they get to him." He let it sit. "He didn't have to spend a single shot on us," Ray said. "Not one. He could have watched us die and saved his rounds for himself. He didn't. I'm not leaving him." Doc stayed with the wounded. That was non-negotiable. He was the only one who could keep Tuck and Lang alive, and somebody had to be on the radio when the weather finally broke and the birds came. He didn't like it. Doc never liked staying behind. But he was a professional and he knew where he was needed, and he set up in the creek bend with Tuck and Lang and Bishop. Bishop, who Ray's left as the gun on the casualty point, because if those wounded got rushed, Bishop was the man you wanted standing over them. Bishop didn't argue either. He just looked at me as I checked my mags and he gave me that little nod again. But it was a different nod this time. The first nod had meant this might be it, kid. This one meant come back. So it was Ray's, Pike, and me, going back up. 3 of us back into the bowl, toward the eastern wall, toward the slowing rifle. I have done some hard things in my life. Crossing back over that lip of the creek bed, leaving the cover, climbing back into the place that had just tried to swallow us whole, that's still on the short list. We went up the eastern wall in the dark, using the broken terraces for cover, the same terraces the ghost had been shooting from above. The enemy's attention was still mostly turned in on itself. Between the man on the wall and our breakout, we'd thrown their whole night into confusion, and confused men shoot at shadows and at each other. We used that. We moved in the seams of it. And as we climbed, the sound of that old rifle got closer, and I started to be able to hear the other thing underneath it, between the shots. A voice. An old man's voice. Talking. Low, steady, almost conversational, in a language I didn't speak. But you don't need to speak a language to understand a man talking himself through something. The rhythm of it was unmistakable. It was the sound of someone keeping themselves company in the dark. The sound of someone who has decided how the night is going to end for him and has made peace with it and is just narrating his way there. Crack, pause, a few quiet words, the working of the bolt, pause, a few more words, crack. I will hear that as long as I live. We came up over the last terrace and we found him. And I want to take a second here, because the picture of it is burned into me and I need to get it right. He was old, genuinely old, not weathered 40 old, not hard-living old, but old, the kind of old where the skin goes thin over the bones of the hands. Gray, what was left of his hair. A face like the mountains themselves, all lines and weather. He was sitting, not crouched, not in any kind of fighting stance, just sitting with his back against a low stone wall and one knee up, the way an old man sits to rest. And across that knee was the rifle. It was ancient, bolt-action, woodstock, worn pale and smooth where 1,000 hands, or one pair of hands 1,000 times, had held it. A military rifle from some war decades gone. The kind of thing that hangs on a wall, or stands in a corner wrapped in cloth, or gets passed from a father to a son with a story attached to it. There were spent brass casings scattered around him in the dirt. A lot of them. Not the great heap you'd get from a modern rifle in a firefight, but for a bolt gun, fired one careful round at a time by one old man, it was a staggering number. Every one of them a breath he'd taken, an aim he'd held, a life he'd ended to buy strangers a few more seconds. He was hit. I saw that right away. Doc would have seen it from across the valley. He had a hand pressed low against his side and there was dark spreading under it and he was not getting up from this. He knew it. You could see he knew it. And when he saw us come over that terrace, 3 armed men, faces blacked, the very people he'd spent his last hour and his last blood keeping alive, he didn't flinch. He didn't raise the rifle. He looked at us, this old man, and something moved across that mountain range face that took me years to find the word for. Relief. Not for himself. He was past that. Relief that we'd made it. Relief that the thing he'd been buying had actually been bought. He'd been up here in the dark not knowing if any of it had worked. Not knowing if the strangers he was dying for had gotten out or been overrun. And now here we were, alive in front of him, and he could see that it had been worth it. He said something, to Ray's, a few words in that language none of us had, and then Ray's confirmed this to me years later, sitting in his kitchen. With a coffee going cold in front of him and his voice not quite steady, the old man said 3 words in English, slow, carefully, like he'd been saving them. I'll tell you what they were. But not yet. Ray's got to him first. Dropped to a knee beside him, fast but gentle, the way you go to someone you already know you can't fix. His hands went to the old man's side, over the old man's own hand, pressing, and the old man let him. But he was shaking his head slow. A small patient no. The no of a man who has lived a long time and knows the difference between a wound you walk away from and a wound you don't. Pike took a knee facing out, rifle up, covering the slope, because somebody had to and Pike always knew which job nobody was doing. I stood there for half a second too long, just looking at this old man and his old gun and all that brass in the dirt, and then I dropped down too and got my hands where Ray's pointed them. And the old man looked at Ray's, and he said his few words in his own language, soft, and then those three in English. "You are home." That's what he said, 3 words, "You are home." I didn't understand it. Not then. I thought maybe his English was just broken, that he was reaching for something else and that's what came out. You are safe, maybe. You are home didn't make sense. We weren't home. We were on the side of a mountain on the worst night of my life, 10,000 miles from anything I'd call home. It took Ray's a long time to explain it to me. Years. And when he did, the whole night turned over and showed me its other side. Here's what we pieced together. Some that night in pieces, from the few words the old man had and the few Ray's had in his language. Most of it later from the village, from the people who came back after, from the slow, careful work Ray's did for years afterward to find out who he'd knelt beside in the dark. The old man's name was Mirza. Decades before, back when he was young, younger than I was that night, there'd been another war in those mountains. A different flag, a different enemy, the same valleys. And in that long-ago war, a young Mirza had been pulled half dead out of a collapsed position by foreign soldiers. Men who didn't speak his language. Men who had no reason to stop for him. Men who were retreating, who could have left him, who every rule of survival said should have left him and who carried him out anyway. Strangers. Who chose him. He never forgot it. You don't. He spent his whole long life in that valley, in Daru, watched wars come and go across those mountains like weather, raised sons and buried some of them, got old. And he kept that rifle. The same rifle one of those foreign soldiers had pressed into his hands at the end, when they finally put him down somewhere safe. "Here, old son, you might need this," a soldier's rough kindness. A thing to defend himself with, and a thing to remember by. 60 years that rifle hung in his house. And then one night, the men who'd emptied his village, who'd driven his neighbors out and turned Daru into bait, set a trap for foreign soldiers. And old Mirza, who couldn't have stopped them with words, who had no power left in the world except one ancient gun and one unbreakable memory, watched from his window as 8 young strangers walked up his creek bed into the throat of it. Strangers, the same as he'd been once. Foreign soldiers walking into a death that wasn't theirs, the way someone had once walked into his. So he took the rifle off the wall. And he went up the hill to pay back a debt he'd carried for 60 years. You are home. That's what he meant. Ray's worked it out and it nearly broke him to say it to me, all those years later in his kitchen. The old man wasn't telling us we were home. He was telling himself. He'd spent 60 years owing a thing he could never repay, to men he'd never see again in a language he never learned. And on that last night with that old gun, kneeling in the dirt with foreign soldiers' hands pressed against his side trying to keep his blood in, he had finally squared it. Carried someone the way he'd been carried. The circle had closed. He was home. Wherever a man goes when a debt that big is finally, fully paid, he'd arrived there. And he wanted us to know it. He spent 3 of his last breaths in a language that wasn't his to make sure the people he was dying for understood that he'd died square, not in despair, not for nothing, but home. I think about that more than almost anything else in my life. But that's the meaning, and the meaning came later. That night on the wall, we still had a problem, and the problem was that the enemy was sorting itself out. The confusion we'd thrown them into was wearing off. The shooting from the wall had stopped. Mirza was done. The rifle silent across his knee now. His work finished. And a smart commander down there was going to realize real quick that the ghost on the eastern wall had gone quiet, and that there were now 3 of us up here instead of 1, and he was going to come up and settle the whole account at once. Ray's felt it. We can't hold here. We move him or we leave him, and we are not leaving him. We tried to move him. We got him up, me on one side, Ray's on the other, Pike covering, and the old man led us. He tried to help even, tried to get his old legs under him out of sheer pride, and for about 10 steps it almost worked. But the wound was the kind I told you about. The kind you don't walk away from. He got grayer with every step, and his weight came heavier onto us, and somewhere in those 10 steps the difference between carrying a wounded man and carrying a dying one disappeared, the way it does, without any announcement. He stopped us, put a thin hand on Ray's chest, stopped us. And he looked back down the hill, toward where his village stood empty in the dark, and then up at the sky, where you could just start to feel the weather changing, the wind shifting, the clouds beginning to tear, the first hint that the passes might open and the birds might come. And he said something quiet in his own tongue, the same handful of words he'd been saying to himself up on the wall all night, the conversation he'd been having with the dark. Ray's told me later what he thought it meant. Not a translation. Ray's never claimed to have the exact words, but the sense of it. I've got it from here. That's what it felt like, Ray's said. An old soldier telling younger ones to go. I've held this hill. I know how this part goes. You've got wounded down there and a window opening up and a long way to carry them. Don't spend yourselves on a man who's already paid his bill. Go. We didn't want to. I want that on the record. We did not want to. Even me, who 20 minutes earlier hadn't wanted to climb back up at all, now that I was here, kneeling next to him, now that I knew even a fraction of who he was, I did not want to set him down in that dirt and leave him. But the wind was tearing the clouds open, and the radio in my ear had crackled to life, Doc's voice, fast and hopeful, birds inbound, weather's breaking, get to the creek. And there were 3 wounded men down in that creek bed who would live or die based on whether we got back to them before the enemy did. The math was ugly, and it was honest, and the old man had already done it in his head before any of us, which is why he'd stopped us. Ray's is the one who set him down, gently, got him back against a low wall into that same resting posture we'd found him in, knee up, the old rifle laid across it, put his canteen in his hand. And then Ray's did something I've never told anyone. He took off his own glove and he held the old man's hand, both hands, the young soldier's 2 around the old soldier's 1, for just a second. And he said in English, knowing the man probably couldn't understand the words, but trusting he'd understand the rest. Thank you, we've got it from here too. The old man smiled. I saw it. A real one. The lines of that mountain range face all rearranging into something I can only call peace. And we went down the hill. We made the creek. The birds came through the breaking clouds. We got Tuck and Lang and Bishop and Doc and ourselves out of the bowl of Sarkesh as the first gray of dawn started to leak over the eastern wall, the same wall where an old man sat with a 60-year-old rifle and a debt finally paid. I looked back once from the door of the helicopter as we lifted. I couldn't see him. Of course I couldn't. He was just one old man against one stone wall in a valley full of stone, going gold now in the first light. But I knew exactly where he was. And I knew he was home. You'd think a night like that would be the end of the story. It wasn't. For most of us it was the beginning of a much longer one. The kind that doesn't have firefights in it. The kind that happens slow over years. In kitchens and phone calls, and a long letter that took a long time to write. Let me close it out properly, the people first, then the old man, then the thing I came here to say. We all made it. I want to lead with that because I've made you sit through a hard night and you deserve the good part. Tuck kept his leg, after 3 surgeries and a year of swearing at physical therapists who were just trying to help him. He walks with a hitch in cold weather, and he'll tell you the leg predicts rain better than any app, and he's not entirely joking. Lang's shoulder healed clean. Pike took that scalp graze and a couple of stitches, and was annoyed it didn't leave a better scar. Bishop went right back out, the way Bishop did, and stayed in long after the rest of us were done. Doc Avila got out a few years later and went to nursing school, of all things, and I think about that a lot, that a man who learned medicine in the dark with rounds coming through the windows decided to go spend the rest of his life keeping people alive in rooms with good light and no one shooting. He's got a daughter in college now, the same daughter whose photo was taped inside his helmet that night. He says she doesn't know the half of it. He says he'd like to keep it that way. And Ray's stayed calm and low and slow right up until the day he retired, and then he carried the old man home with him. I mean that almost literally. Ray's could not let it go. Some men can compartment a thing like Mirza and file it and function. Ray's wasn't built that way underneath all that calm. He needed to know who the man was, whether his people made it, whether anyone had ever buried him right. It took him years. Here's what Ray's found, piece by piece, in a search that ran longer than my own career. When it was finally safe, the people of Daru came back. Not all of them, never all of them, not after a thing like that, but enough. And when they came back up the eastern wall, they found the old man where we'd left him, against his low stone wall, the rifle across his knee, his hand around a canteen that wasn't his. And they knew exactly what had happened, because they knew Mirza. They knew his story, the young man pulled out of a collapsed position 60 years before by foreign soldiers, the rifle he'd kept on his wall his whole life, the way he'd tell that story to anyone who'd sit still for it. The old folks in that village had heard it 100 times. The foreigners carried me out. I owed them. One day I'll pay it. They knew. They put it together faster than we ever could have. An old man, gone up the hill in the night with the rifle off his wall, to do for foreign soldiers what foreign soldiers had once done for him. They buried him on the eastern wall, looking out over the bowl. They didn't move him down. They said that's where he'd want to be, up high, where he could see the whole valley, where he'd finally paid what he owed. Ray's found the grave, years later, went back properly through proper channels with proper people, and he stood at it. He told me about that too in the kitchen, and that was the only time in 20 years of knowing the man that I saw Chief Ray's cry. Just a little, just at the corners. "You are home," he kept saying. He told me he was home and I didn't understand, and now I'm standing at the place and he was right. He was home the whole time. The rifle is the part that gets me. Mirza's family wanted Ray's to have it. The old bolt gun, 60 years on the wall, the brass and blood knight on the eastern slope. They wanted the soldier who'd held the old man's hand to have the rifle that had saved his men. It was the only way they had to say the thing that has no words in any language. Ray's wouldn't take it. He said it belonged in Daru. He said a thing like that should stay where the story is, with the people who'd keep telling it right. So it's back on a wall, I'm told. A different wall in a rebuilt house in a village that came back to life, and the children of Daru grow up hearing about the old man who went up the hill in the dark to pay a 60-year debt, the way Mirza himself grew up hearing, well, the way all the best stories get carried, mouth to mouth, generation to generation, the story doing the thing the rifle did, getting passed down, kept loaded, ready. I told you at the start that nobody believes me when I tell this story. And I understand why. It sounds made up. The lone old man, the ancient rifle, the perfect shots in the dark, the 3 English words. It's got the shape of a story somebody invented to make you feel something. But I was there. I knelt in that dirt. I felt his weight come off my shoulder when we tried to carry him, and the night decided we couldn't. I heard the bolt of that rifle working in the dark, slow and patient, between an old man's quiet words to himself. I saw the relief on his face when he understood we'd made it out. It happened. All of it happened. And the reason I finally tell it now, after keeping it folded up small for so long, is this. I spent a lot of years thinking that night was about how close we came to dying. That's the version I'd give at the dinner table, the trap, the bowl, the surrounded seals, the narrow escape. A war story. A close call. But it was never about that. It was about a debt. A young man got carried out of the dark by strangers 60 years before I was born, and he held that gift his whole life, not as a weight, but as something he was grateful for the chance to one day return. He waited 60 years for the bill to come due, and when it did, on the worst night of my life, he climbed a hill he had no business climbing with a gun off a wall, and he paid it in full, and he died square, and he died home. We didn't save him, I need you to hear that. We tried and we couldn't, and that's the truth. He saved us. And the only thing he ever asked in return, the only thing was that someday we'd do the same for somebody else. He never said that. He didn't have the words and we didn't share a language. But that's the only way a debt like that ever gets paid. Not back, forward. So that's why I tell it now. Because the bill's been sitting with me for 15 years, and I'm getting older, and an old man on a mountain taught me the only thing you can do with a gift that big. You carry someone. When it's your turn, and the night is at its worst, and every smart instinct you have is screaming to keep moving, you stop, and you turn around, and you carry someone out of the dark. That's the whole story. That's the only thing it was ever about. He was home. And someday, when I've carried who I'm meant to carry, I hope I get to be too.